That's what brings units together in combat. That's what makes them very successful. So when we have harmful behaviors like sexual harassment, sexual assault, racism, and extremism in our force, that breaks down unit cohesion. And it's just, quite frankly, not something we want in the Army. It breaks the trust in the Army. It hurts our soldiers. And so we can't have those type of things in our Army. We're going after that very aggressively. We don't see a lot of that in the Army, but at the same time, one is too many when it comes to those harmful behaviors. So we are committed to making sure we don't have them.
Thank you. General Brown?
Yeah, so I guess what I would add to Jim Combo's comments is I often think about what is good about our United States Air Force, our United States military, and all the things that our service members do when they take an oath of office or oath of enlistment in the environment where we want all of our service members to reach their full potential. But then you have some of the examples that Jim described, whether it's racism, discrimination, sexual assault, harassment, interpersonal violence, extremism, that detract from what makes our military so strong. And from a readiness standpoint, I think we're doing okay. There's things we can always do better on. But the fact that we're actually having these conversations, and I think our service members appreciate the fact that we're having these conversations to make progress. The United States military in our nation has really led the way in certain areas. And I think about the privilege for me to be in the position I am as the first African American to serve as a service chief. And I just, matter of fact, this weekend spoke to a Tuskegee Airmen event where, because of them, I'm actually able to do what I do today. And so I really value the service from those who went before us, and those of us, myself and Jim and the rest of the service chiefs, and what we're doing to ensure that all our service members can reach their full potential.
Just as we close up, I really appreciate your candor, because I know these are tough issues to talk about, but just as we close up, because I wanted to learn more from your team about the Connect Everything. I've always been interested in technology and how it changes what your options are out there. Let me just leave you with one final unfair question, which is, what do you think is a blind spot that we ought to be thinking more about? As I told Michelle Flournoy, it's not surprising we're talking about China or Russia or North Korea or Iran. That would have been the case anyway. Maybe different talking about the way in which those threats are deployed or the battle forms. But I'm just sort of interested in whether or not you have exercises that tries to think about, we hadn't thought about, domestic security. We hadn't thought about terror groups before 9/11 occurred. Are there things out there, not to kind of give a green flag to anyone that's thinking, but are there ways or exercises, mental processes that you go through and exercises to help us see beyond the corner, so that we're not just doing what we did yesterday and feeling good that we're doing the same thing today? General McConville?
Yeah, I'll start with there's always that old cliche about, generals trying to fight the last fight or fight the last fight better. I think, at least with the chiefs, as we've talked, we're all trying to win the next fight. And I think we understand that the next fight is going to be different. We have different technologies. We're going to have different organizations. And quite frankly, we're developing different doctrine so we can fight and win the next fight. And we know we get it right when it's peace through strength. And that strength comes from, a strong whole of government approach with a strong military, but also strong allies and partners. And as we go through this process, where we have to take a look at our adversaries are going to use anything at their means to gain a decisive advantage. And so as we go through our war gaming and simulation, we've seen what a pandemic can do to us. So we should not assume that those who wish us harm would not be, willing to use those type of things. We've seen different types of explosives. We're certainly concerned about the proliferation of unmanned aerial systems, which have, which I think are almost like the IED or a few years back. A lot of people are using those type of things. And so I just think that we need to work together, make sure that we have a strong whole of government effect. We have a strong military, and we're so strong that no one wants to take us on.
General Brown?
Yeah, I think, if I had to maybe call it a blind spot, but one kind of aha moment for me is the fact that I don't know that we're moving fast enough and understand the pace of where our adversaries are going. And that's why when I came into this position, I wrote my strategic approach of accelerate, change, or lose. Because the things we're doing today I don't think will be successful for tomorrow. Which is going to drive us to actually look at how we would do things differently as a not only as an Air Force, but as a joint team here in the department. And it really is going to have to help to break down some of the barriers and approaches we've taken to accelerate some of the capabilities we're going to need into the future. I think the other part I would also add to this is just we talked about being able to connect. It's really connecting the right sensor to the right shooter or right decision maker, and being able to move forward and really be able to make decisions when you have imperfect information. Because I think the fog and friction we will see in the future will be at a higher level because we're so used to getting so much information now. You can either have information overload or information that is not necessarily clear, or it could be deceptive, or we could be disconnected. And so those are going to be the challenges I see for us as we go forward in the future, to be able to make those connections as quickly as possible and make decisions, and being willing to take a little bit of risk. What we probably haven't done in the past 20, 30 years that we've done our fight against violent extremism, particularly if you start getting into a high-end conflict. And that will be a challenge for us, not only as a service, but I would say as a nation as well.
Well, listen, General Charles Q. Brown, Jr., Chief of Staff, the Air Force, General James McConville, Chief of Staff, the Army. This is really, really cool. I would just, say, one of the things I was thinking, listening to you, because I was privileged to be able to do these conversations, decades ago. If you took those conversations that were similar about strategy and capabilities 25 years ago and fast forward to today, I'm kind of very proud of how we've evolved and thought about it. So it gives me hope for the time we discuss all this 25 years from now. Thank you very much, both of you, for sharing your thoughts on interoperability, about the future of defense, and about what you're both doing to work together, which I celebrate. I think it's fantastic.
Well, thank you. It was great being with you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
And now for a message from our sponsor, Collins Aerospace.
Hello, everyone. I'm Erin McEdigan, joined today by Dave Newsma, President of Avionics at Collins Aerospace. Dave is also an Air Force veteran and has served at Collins for more than 30 years. Welcome to the Future of Defense Summit, Dave.
Well, thanks, Erin. Thanks to the Hill for having us today. We're really enjoying hearing from our distinguished speakers at today's summit and really happy to participate.
What do you see as the most important technology advancements required to ensure that we have the capabilities to exceed our peer and near-peer threats in the future?
As we look at the threats that are facing us today and anticipate what's going to come next, Collins Aerospace is investing heavily to enhance capabilities of the warfighter in a whole host of advanced technologies. Most notably by developing things like open systems, which enable flexible interoperability and drive kind of near-term real-time system updates in even the toughest environments, and avoiding vendor lock.
Today's battle space covers the air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace. How are Collins Aerospace technologies connecting those domains?
To achieve overmatch, we're actually connecting multi-domain battle space and providing assured PNT. So the forces are linked and they can navigate confidently no matter where the fight takes them. We're enhancing interoperability to ensure real-time and seamless portability of information in order to improve mission effectiveness. Further, we provide intelligent, autonomous solutions which enable more speed, agility, situational awareness, as well as safety. Collins is leading the development of open systems and secure solutions, while leveraging our commercial technologies to enhance integration and flexibility and ensure the warfighter is prepared with cutting-edge training and simulation solutions.
And why are those open architecture solutions for military avionics so important?
Harmonizing technical standards across ground vehicles, aircraft, other systems, it enables the warfighter to share tactical data in the battle to save lives. So, think about a tank that can detect it's being shot at and automatically alert other tanks in the formation using defensive sensors. Enabling machine-to-machine exchange of data can happen quickly if all vehicles and aircraft use common and compatible electronics. So, we're leveraging our expertise across Raytheon Technologies and Collins Aerospace to develop more open, modular communications and connectivity systems that need to keep pace with today's evolving threats and technology.
As peer and near-peer threats evolve, in the near-term future, what avionics capabilities do you think are going to be most important?
Yeah, I think near term, we're focused on delivering the future vertical lift needs for decades to come. Those fleet requirements need, secure, connected, It's got to be based on open systems and reduce pilot workload through enhanced autonomy. So, a couple things. We're developing a digital backbone for the U.S. Army's Future Vertical Lift program, which establishes the aircraft infrastructure that's necessary to allow for rapid insertion of new capabilities. We've also created a system called Mozark, which is an advanced integrated avionics system that's based on open systems, as well as standardized hardware and software interfaces. So that supports the break of vendor lock and allows for more rapid third-party integration. In our displays, Mozark really reduces pilot workload through autonomous solutions and ensures air crews are better informed and enhances overall safety. So in addition, it leverages a lot of the mature cybersecurity technologies and provides a low-cost, low-risk, certifiable solution that helps forces adapt to some of the evolving threats.
Thank you, Dave, for sharing your perspective on the priorities of Collins Aerospace defense technology and the importance of protecting the warfighter with advanced solutions.
Yeah, you're welcome. And again, thanks for the opportunity. At Collins, we certainly understand that mission success requires highly reliable communications, nav, display, and multi-system management avionics that really allow the warfighter to operate in any airspace.
Fascinating to see what's coming down the pike. My next guest is Congressman Adam Kinzinger from Illinois, who is a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, a frequent guest of ours at the Hill, and we're very grateful for that. He's also served in the Air Force in both Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. Congressman Kinzinger, it's great to see you again. I know and I admire greatly your worry about the health of democracy in this country, which is one topic we go. The other concern is that the health of national security in this country, and how do we make smart, correct bets in the future about our security and defense. And you are now, on all sides of this. You fought for the country. You're now fighting for the country in Congress. What are parts of your dashboard that you'd like to share with our audience today that you think really matter about our national security priorities?
Well, first off, thanks for having me. And just so you know, I'm getting a little distorted audio from you. I can hear you, but if I have the same problem, let me know and we can reset
it. You sound great.
But, oh, great. Okay, perfect. So look, I think, and thanks for having me, one of the biggest concerns that I have is, as you mentioned, foreign policy is a passion of mine because I think, America has a special, unique role in this world that no other country can serve. And that is to be an example to millions of people that are really just desperate for a taste of what we have. And when I see democracy shudder like we've had, it's kind of like, for the pilots out there, right before you stall, you hit a buffet. And that was January 6th. It was like this warning that we're in a bad place. I think it not only hurts our moral authority, but democracies are not defined just by bad days, but how we come back from them. But beyond that, it's our foreign policy has now started to become partisan. You see things like Russia and China now kind of falling into partisan camps. You blame Russia more if you're this person or China more if you're that on that side of the aisle. And I think that disunity in our foreign policy, and particularly the disunity and mistrust at home, is really among my biggest fears in foreign policy, because I think that takes away our ability to have a real impact everywhere else.
I know this is an unfair question, but what do you think the Biden team could do to detoxify that environment and go back to those old days of Vandenberg and others that were able to reach across the aisle on national security? What are some of the things you would tell this administration, this would help when it comes to defense?
So I think a couple things, but first, just in how we talk about stuff, we get in this cycle. Frankly, honestly, both parties get in it, where if it's time for a little payback, we do payback. If it's time to, say, well, the other side does it this way, so we're going to match that, that happens. And that happens a lot when we talk about issues, when we talk about, of course, January 6th. My advice to the Biden administration on tone is basically keep doing what you're doing. I think they have brought down the rhetoric on foreign policy a lot. I think, the restoration of alliances is going to be important to show people in the United States the importance of an alliance. NATO, we're very important for NATO. NATO is also really important for us. And I think recognizing the challenges in a fair way. So, seeing that China is going to be a really kind of a generational competition in the United States. Nobody seeks war with China, but we have to maintain our interests. also confronting places like Russia and, of course, terrorism. I think really when it comes to just restoring that, its tone, and then congressional leadership, particularly because the Democrats are in the majority now, especially on the Foreign Policy Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, is don't just bring up kind of issue du jour that are out there playing in a campaign, but just really address real issues of national security. And I think we can keep politics from, or start to have politics come out of infecting those conversations that shouldn't be infected by politics.
One of the topics I've been long interested in is Afghanistan. I've been writing about it for 20 years. And it seems for like the last 11 years, the concerns about how to leave responsibly have been mentioned every year. They're coming up again, which means don't leave. And I'm just interested. You've been in that fray in Iraq, and you know Afghanistan. I guess the question is, when does the political guidance to the Pentagon and to the White House, need to shift so that you can leave responsibly, but we leave?
Well, it's a good question. And I think there's a couple of things we have to table set on Afghanistan a little bit. Even President Trump at one point kind of slipped up and said, it's not really a war, it's kind of a peacekeeping mission right now. And you recognize the fact that the Afghan people are the ones bearing the brunt of the war. There's still a significant amount of them being killed every day. But they want the United States there to help stiffen their spine with NATO. What we're doing is basically having combat power where we need to against terrorists, strengthening our Afghan allies, and hoping that we can get to a point where, we can leave, and soon. The issue is, though, I think we have to look at what is the alternative. If we pull out and NATO pulls out, I think it's pretty obvious that it's going to be tough for the Afghan government to stay. And what does that take us to? Anytime you have ungoverned territory, where terrorist organizations can plan and train and recruit, is dangerous. And we know we're going to end back there anyway. You look at, frankly, the mineral wealth of Afghanistan, and you know how much China wants that to strengthen their grip on the world. So I think for us, it's not a matter of, talking about endless wars. It's a matter of recognizing that when we have peacekeeping operations, sometimes we have to stay there for a long time. We still have people in Kosovo and other places, but we want to leave, but we also can't do it prematurely. And so I think as Americans, we have a question. Do we put another 100,000 troops in and defeat the Taliban? I don't think there's any political will to do that. So in the meantime, what we're showing, like what we did in Iraq, a smaller American footprint to strengthen the bigger footprint of those in the area is successful. But I think we have to get out of this kind of constant thing of we just need to leave. And frankly, I think the administration needs to go back to explaining why we're there and what happens if we do leave.
Thank you for that. Adam, what's your dashboard on China? I know you were part of the Republican House Task Force on China, and the administration, Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan met their Chinese counterparts over in Alaska recently, had some tough talk. But I guess, if I were a member of Congress and I wanted to, confront China, the first thing I would do is say, let's double the National Science Foundation budget. Let's invest in ourselves. I don't often hear those kinds of things. It's more about posturing about China. But I'd love to get your insights into what you think would be credible measures to kind of deal with the China challenge that our audience ought to hear.
So I think you're absolutely right. When we see things like AI, quantum computing, the stuff that, scares us because we think it's going to lead to the Terminator trilogy. Well, it may, but it's quite honestly, the Chinese and the Russians, for instance, are chasing this. So I think the investment in things like that is really important, recognizing the role that diplomacy plays. Looking at what China has done with the Belt and Road Initiative, and I just saw indications that this administration was looking at, or maybe President Biden mentioned the idea of having a competing Belt and Road Initiative. I think that's brilliant, quite honestly. Of course, devil's in the details. But I think looking at this as a battle around the world, not of necessarily tanks and ships and airplanes, we hope, but also a battle of people choosing freedom over communism backed up by a free market, a crony free market. And I think also things like, exposing the amount of debt that China actually has out there in a lot of their debt diplomacy traps. How leveraged is China? Exposing things like the fact that the Chinese Communist Party spends more money on internal security than they do on external security. What are they afraid of? So I think it's confronting ideologically. it's confronting ideologically with diplomacy around the world. And of course, still having that posture militarily so that we are very clear that there will be consequences to crossing lines. It's the problem with being a superpower is you have to be good in all areas. If you're a regional power, a rising power like China, you just have to be able to, for instance, be really good at pushing American troops out of your near region and hoping you crack their will. And I think making it clear that they won't crack the American will actually would make war far less likely between us.
You mentioned ships and planes and something else in there, satellites, whatever. We make these things. We make them. And I was on a call recently with one of your colleagues, Elaine Luria of Virginia. Incredible, where we were talking about Navy. She was in the Navy, but her sophisticated understanding of how, the dimensions of that defense industrial base allows us to make some of the most sophisticated weaponry and planes and whatnot in the world. And I don't know if there's actually a very good public understanding of how vital that capacity is for manufacturing, for technology development. And I worry a little bit, to be candid, that not knowing creates an ambivalence about it. And I'm just wondering whether it comes to these platforms, and I want to acknowledge we do have a sponsor of this, but that's not why I'm asking this question, but whether or not we need to somehow ratchet up to remind people that the global supply chain, that technology, these issues that go into this, these sophisticated weapon systems, radars, space, etc., really matter for this country.
I think it's a great point. And I think, understanding that, I represent Rockford, Illinois. It's the fifth largest aerospace manufacturing hub in the country. They have pieces of everything in aerospace and how America has basically re-excelled in the aerospace area and the importance not just to jobs. Jobs are extremely important, of course, and making sure we have that for people. But the fact that, look, if we ever, God forbid, enter a situation with like World War III, who's in the best position to deal with that? Why is it important to have, strong space-based asset? And I think part of that, talking about that supply chain as well, is talking in more depth about the defense budget. It's really easy to look at the defense budget and say, well, America spends more than the next dozen countries combined. What they don't take into account a lot of the times in that discussion is the fact that a significant portion of the defense budget goes to pay and benefits of the military. Now, we always in Congress love to raise the military's pay. That's a good thing. And then we cap the defense budget. And all we're doing in that process is taking away from what we can invest in that next generation of technology. Because yes, it's politically easy to say, I want to give a 4% pay raise to the troops. It's also politically easy to say we spend too much on defense and we need to cut it. And then we wonder why we have accidents around the world or people aren't getting the training. And I think that is really essential as we go forward and we talk about smart defense budgeting to make sure that we're very clear about that.
Well, Representative Adam Kinzinger, a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee from Illinois, I will say, very politely and respectfully of our former president, I used to read his tweets every day because it was part of our job and we needed to be aware of what he was doing. I look into your tweets because I really want to. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, you bet. Good talking to you. Hey, if you're out there too, Adam Kinzinger, follow it. We have fun.
Absolutely. And now for a message from our sponsor, Lockheed Martin.
Tonight, the CDC is confirming the first case in the U.S. of a new and deadly coronavirus.
As the pandemic unfolded, it could have shut down the U.S. defense industrial base. Instead, the people of Lockheed Martin got to work. Our top priority was to ensure factories and labs were safe for our workers. We accelerated payments to thousands of suppliers, and we helped our neighbors and communities, funding frontline workers and first responders, and helping students access technology for online learning, producing and donating protective equipment, lending our expertise for COVID therapeutic manufacturing, and providing our neighbors hundreds of thousands of meals. How you perform under pressure reveals who you are. We're the people of Lockheed Martin, and we stand side by side, united with our fellow Americans, every step of the way.
My next guest is a member of the Armed Services Committee, an Iraq War veteran, and a Purple Heart recipient. Last week, I had the opportunity to speak with Senator Tammy Duckworth from Illinois. So let me just ask you, you're on the committees, you've served veterans, you've served in the military. I'd like to know, as we think about the hard choices, that we can't have it all, but what are some of the hard, the disciplines of hard choices that we need to make on our national security as you see it?
Well, I think that we can't skimp on readiness. I know that, my colleagues on both sides of the aisle would agree with me that we need to support the men and women of our armed forces, and we need to make sure that they have the equipment and the training that they need to keep us and our nation safe. But there's bloat in the defense budget. There are things that we can go after. I mean, not the least of which would be, for example, service contracts. We can take a look at that. So I would hope that we continue some of the work that DoD has been doing with relooking at some of the ways that's happening within the DoD budget. But I think that we should never sacrifice when it comes to readiness, whether it is in terms of equipment or personnel.
I'm interested in. We're going to be discussing China a lot today, and you sort of begin to think about, well, what are the strategic guideposts in carving out what sorts of national security posture and capacity we should have. But defense has become such a big issue. Everything from small group non-state terrorism to various forms of state actor and non-state actor, cyber threats. And so it's not just all a function of militaries. And I'm just wondering what you think the literacy of your colleagues is on the very multidimensional nature of threats today.
Well, I think that, that's one of those ongoing conversations I have with my colleagues. I mean, the PRC is a great example, right? We need to stand up to them. They obviously are an adversary in terms of national security issues, but also we have to still conduct trade with them, and we still have to work with them. They are one of the largest customers for corn and soybean and pork products out of Illinois. On the other hand, I know that, they are pushing hard in the Indo-Pacific region. And when I talk to our allies and friends in the Indo-Pacific region, what they say is, please, we need the United States to be here and be a presence to oppose the PRC and to give us something to hang our hat on when the PRC comes and tries to push us to do things their way. And so I think it's a balancing act. And those are the conversations I have with my colleagues all the time, is that we, the United States, have to be a presence, especially in a place like the Indo-Pacific, both militarily, but economically as well. So we need to look at, for example, re-engaging in trade agreements, whether it's bilateral or multilateral trade agreements, at the same time as making sure that we resource the Indo-PACOM so that they can have a real presence in the region as well.
Senator, I think it was shocking to many people that the January 6th insurrection comprised so many former veterans, folks from police units, and a focus has come. Secretary Austin has begun to create a kind of introspective look at people that have been both radicalized in the military and that are targeted by some of these radical groups. How big a problem do you think this is? And do you think there's a pathway for dealing with really the dangers within our military facing our government today?
So these were conversations I had with then General Austin, retired General Austin, now Secretary Austin, prior to his confirmation. I think that the trend has been growing, but it's not new, right? We had this happen, and Secretary Austin talked about this with the 82nd Airborne in the early 90s, where you had some skinhead groups and some white supremacist groups target the 82nd Airborne in particular. We've also had drug cartels target members of the military as well. So targeting the military men and women is not a new thing. But I will tell you that I have seen over the last probably 2 decades this growing radicalization of a portion within the military. And I think part of it, too, comes with social media consumption. One of the conversations I had is we don't know what our young troops are consuming because we don't know what they're consuming on their personal devices and the like. And so we need to make sure that we understand what kind of information they're getting and that they are trained to recognize false information, not the least of which we have not been funding programs within the DoD, things like the Pentagon channel. When I first enlisted, and I would go and get, I'm waiting for my annual physical, I'm getting my ID card made, sitting in the waiting room, any military activity, there'd be a TV channel on. It was always a Pentagon channel reading the news to me. Over the course of my career, I saw that change to CNN, and then it became Fox. Everywhere I went, it was Fox News. And not just Fox News, but Fox Entertainment. And I remember spending the last 10 years of my military career in talks, in op centers, and the biggest screen of the multiple screens that were on, you would see Fox News. And I would say, well, you know what? That's not actually news. That's Fox Entertainment. If you want news, put on CNN. We should still be visually watching everybody else, from Fox to MSNBC to everybody else, and we get a good 360 picture of the situation. But the main source of news cannot be an entertainment division. And so that was one of the conversations I had with the secretary. It was like, we have to root this out. We've got to figure out which troops are coming into the military with these opinions to begin with these tendencies. And then we need to figure out what media they're consuming while they're in, and then who's targeting them. And I'm really pleased that he has done a DoD-wide stand down to look at extremism in the military. And I hope, I'm eager to find out, what the results of his actions are going to be.
Senator, we were all shocked as well, and I have to be honest with Tucker Carlson's comments. I can't believe sometimes that we have to, discuss these ongoing issues of gender justice, gender fairness and equity, but it is an issue in society. I was looking at your tweets, and you commended President Biden for appointing 2 female generals to 4-star commands. I grew up as a military brat. I grew up in DoD schools. I saw outstanding women leaders in the military decades ago, but they were few and far between. I guess my question is, from your experience, and these women that were just appointed 4-star commands, is there now going to be, a chance that when we look at the military, we're going to see, not, 100 men and 4 women, but we're going to see greater gender fairness, equity across all jobs in the military?
I think so. And the combat exclusion rule was part of why we did not have women at the highest levels. We know that you need that combat to be a combatant commander in order to really achieve the highest ranks in the military, both officer and enlisted wise. I see that the falling of those barriers is allowing us to move forward, but we're still not there yet. I mean, I actually, in this latest NDAA, successfully included funding for a report on the lack of diversity in our special operator community. For example, it's not just women, but it's also people of color. Why is it we have so, underrepresentation of people of color in the special operator community, especially at the highest rank? And as long as that is happening, we're not tapping into the full strength of this nation. We have to be all over the globe, a leader of the free world. And it helps us, and it is better for us when we show up with diversity in the troops. And when we show up in Africa and there is an African-American, leader amongst our troops. When we're in Asia, we're going to go into the Philippines and go after Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines. It's good that we have Filipino speaking American servicemen and women who can actually engage there. And so this is really, really important. And we need to make sure that we have diversity at the very top of our military. Gender diversity is important, but also racial diversity as well.
Let me ask you finally, Senator, this is a great conversation. I like talking big ideas with folks here. But the big question I have is, we've gone through a number of years where we have been sort of rough on our allies. Our former administration was somewhat cozy with certain questionable leaders like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. It raises questions on whether the solvency of the American alliance with allies is something that they can trust America to be with them in their dark days. And my question is, from a strategic perspective, from an alliance perspective, which is different than talking about what tools and devices and ships and planes we have. But I'd just like to know whether talking to leaders from around the world and also our combatant commanders, whether those relationships are solid now, or whether there is such a period of doubt that now has to be overcome. And sometimes doubt and trust are forged after conflicts. So I'm just wondering if America can bounce back from your point of view as a reliable ally without having a collision somewhere.
Yeah, I think we can. And I think that the rest of the world is eager. They're eager for us to regain and reclaim our leadership role. And I think the election of President Biden was a big step in that direction. But we have to follow through with that. I'll give you an example. In the Indo-Pacific region, I was at the Shangri-La Dialogues 2 years ago, and one of the things that they said to us is just be here. Just be here and stand up for the rule of law, for international norms, and be a presence in the region. And I heard that over and over and over again from the Vietnamese, from the Indonesians, from everybody that we chatted with. And I think that you're going to see that greater engagement. You saw that right now with the NDS. That's, I think, one of the things that the Trump administration actually did really well was identifying the Indo-Pacific region as a place where we need to be more of a presence. Admiral Davidson did an excellent job with that. I was just chatting with him, and now with his nominee to be his replacement, Admiral Aquilino, I was just chatting with him today and saying we have to be in the region. And it's not just in terms of military presence, but we have to engage in trade. We have to engage in partnerships as well. I think we're well on our way back to regaining the trust. But we have to be consistent, and we have to continue to show up. We've disappeared for 4 years, and they want to see us there. And these are early days yet, when we're just a couple months into the Biden administration. And I think you're going to see over the next 4 years, America really reclaim and retake our leadership role. I know that here in the Senate, there's a bipartisan support for that push. I'm actually working with Senator Sullivan of Alaska. He and I are leading the next CODEL to the Shangri-La Dialogue, for example. And we want to make sure that the rest of the world understand that it's not just the executive branch, but the legislative branch is also behind the re-engagement with the rest of the world as well.
Well, Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, member of the Armed Services Committee, I really appreciate this conversation. You've got an open door. Whenever you want to kind of talk, big issues of national security, defense, or anything else, come back and join us at the Hill. Thank you so much.
I will. We need to talk logistics.
Joining me now is former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, who served in that role from 2011 to 2013. Before becoming Defense Secretary, he also served as Director of the CIA and as Chief of Staff to President Bill Clinton. He's now the Chairman of the Panetta Institute for Public Policy. Secretary Panetta, it's great to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let me just get down to it. If you were in these roles today in Washington with America, that I would say right now, maybe in some tough spots with allies that aren't sure of it, we've had a weird 4 years on some defense and security issues. How would you evaluate the threat spectrum that the United States faces?
Well, there's no question that I think we're living at a time when there are a number of flashpoints in the world, probably more than at the end of World War II. And those threats all represent challenges for the United States, particularly having come through this period where, we have sought to kind of withdraw from our role in the world and basically went into an isolationist America First mode, which sent, I think, the wrong signals to our allies as well as our adversaries. I think the most important thing now is what Joe Biden has been saying, which is important, that the United States is returning to the role of world leader, and that our goal is to try to strengthen and build our alliances in the world so that we can confront these series of flashpoints, whether it's dealing with terrorism, whether it's dealing with Iran, failed states in the Middle East, North Korea, Russia, China, the whole cyber threat. There are a number of threats that are out there that the United States has to confront, and the best way to confront those threats is by strengthening our alliances.
So to go from an America First strategy to an America re-allied strategy with the world, can that be done without a kinetic clash with China?
I've seen China obviously become a lot more aggressive. I think part of the problem is they sensed weakness on the part of the United States. I think same thing with Russia. I think Russia sensed weakness on the part of the United States and took advantage of it in a number of areas, whether it was the Crimea, the Ukraine, or Syria. And China's done the same thing. They've seen a vacuum in terms of world leadership, and so they've gone after those vacuum areas and trying to expand their influence. And they're obviously a lot more aggressive as a result of that. It doesn't mean that we are inevitably headed towards some kind of conflict. I don't think they want a war. We certainly don't want a war. But we're going to have to challenge one another. I mean, we saw both the United States and China like tigers circling in Alaska, both growling at each other, which is part of the dance that I think both had to go through. The real question now is whether or not we can find that balance between maintaining our strength, maintaining our military strength in the Pacific, making clear to them the concerns about human rights in Hong Kong and Taiwan and the South China Sea, but at the same time, try to see if we can't explore some avenues with regards to trade and with regards to issues like cyber and other areas where I think we could make some progress. I think it's going to take the ability to kind of have a very balanced approach that maintains our strength, makes clear to China that we're not going anywhere, and then try to pursue some areas for dialogue.
Mr. Secretary, January 6th is something you wrote about recently in a powerful op-ed for CNN called "The Risks of Ignoring Domestic Terrorists Are Huge." You know, we may not like it, but some of those domestic terrorists who attacked the Capitol were military veterans. They were part of police. There were some, strings in there. Secretary Lloyd Austin has now begun to sort of say we need to be introspective inside the military and look at what those elements of radicalization with some folks are. And you were Secretary of Defense. What are our blind spots in understanding the vulnerability of some of our young men and women to efforts by others to radicalize them and to create the worries that you wrote about in this op-ed?
Well, it relates to not just the military, it relates to our society in general. I mean, I think the consequences of social media, the consequences of polarization in our society, the consequences of the kind of dysfunction we've seen in Washington between the parties and their inability to work together, all of these are feeding off each other. And what it's creating is a tremendous amount of frustration and anger that is being manipulated, obviously, by social media. And it's the kind of thing that attracts young people. We've seen it, we talked about gangs. I remember when we looked at Al-Qaeda, we were looking at how do we go after the root causes of what provides this incentive to young people to become a part of Al-Qaeda, part of terrorism. And the same thing is true for gangs in this country. We always ask the question, what is it that gives them the inspiration to join gangs? We have to ask the same question today with regards to extremist groups, whether they're on the left or on the right. What is it that draws young people to these kinds of reactions? And what we don't know enough of right now, very frankly, is how to get our arms around the influence of social media, basically prying into this anger and frustration and fears that are out there, and trying to motivate people towards the kind of events we saw happen on January 6th. We have not done a good job. We haven't done a good job, frankly, in looking at the root causes for Al-Qaeda, and we sure as hell haven't done a good job at looking at the root causes for terrorism in our own country.
Mr. Secretary, we only have a couple minutes left, but I could talk to you all day. I mean, it's so thoughtful, and you've worked across so many of the different dimensions. But one of the questions I have, when I think about China and its sense of our weakness, and you're sitting at an American university. We look at the research base, the national weapons laboratories, the other national laboratories, the science and technology community here in America. And I wonder, when it comes to AI and quantum computing and 5G and data and all of the stuff that really is going to define power in the future, whether the United States is focused on that agenda enough, whether we're investing enough. What is your sense of it, and what is your sense of the Biden administration, and whether, I know they talk about it, but can they walk the walk of making that investment?
Well, there's not much question in my mind that we're behind on that race for getting to a cutting edge on technology. We should have seen this coming a long time ago. We didn't pay enough attention to it. And the reality is that where technology is going, where artificial intelligence is going, where new systems that relate to potential warfare are being developed. All of that China has focused on a great deal. And we have not invested as much as we should have in research into those areas. We faltered in terms of this aggressive effort to always stay ahead of the curve and be into the 21st century in terms of building our strength. We've got to go back to that. And I think the Biden administration recognizes the need to invest in these new technologies. We have to for our own defense. But it's going to take a while. And we're behind, and we've got to now compete and move quickly. That means providing incentives to private sector technology. It means providing incentives for research. It means putting money into efforts to try to develop those capabilities, because mark my word, that is the future with regards to our ability to protect our national security and our national interests.
I can't help one last one, Mr. Secretary. Afghanistan. Is Afghanistan strategically enhancing for America today, or is it strategically crippling? And what would you do with regards to this war that seems to just go on year to year?
But I think the fundamental question is not the question of whether you end these endless wars. The real question is what's in our national security interests. That's the issue we have to focus on. And that's true when it comes to Afghanistan. The last damn thing you want to happen in Afghanistan is to suddenly pull out of there and have the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and ISIS all restore a base of operations in Afghanistan from which they conduct attacks on the United States. And we would have to respond if that were the case. The same way we did in Iraq. When we got out of Iraq, ISIS developed, ISIS invaded Iraq, we were back at war in Iraq. You don't want to repeat that mistake in Afghanistan. So for that reason, yes, we obviously can try to see whether we can develop a peace agreement with Taliban. I don't trust them very much. I think it would have to be based on conditions that can be enforced if we're going to do anything. And I think, frankly, we probably ought to maintain a presence there in order to make sure that Afghanistan is not again becoming a base of operations for the Taliban or for terrorists.
Your and my good friend Bill Burns has just become director of the CIA. Has he called you yet for any tips? Bill's a great pick to head the CIA. CIA needed somebody of Bill Burns' experience in order to restore their morale and restore the mission of the CIA in providing good intelligence and speaking truth to power. I've told Bill anytime he wants to call me, I'm certainly available because of all the responsibilities I had, I really enjoyed being director of the CIA. Well, Leon Panetta, former director of the CIA, former Secretary of Defense, former many things in this town. It's really great to see you again, and thank you so much for sharing your candid thoughts with us today.
Great. It's good to be with you, Steve.
That brings us to the end of our program, and wow, what a program. A big thank you to our sponsors, Collins Aerospace and Lockheed Martin, for their support, and to all of you attendees for joining us for these conversations. For anybody who's missed any of this, we're going to have the video up from all these different segments on our website shortly. I'm Steve.